Good evening, councillors, staff, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Ordinary Council meeting of the Council for September 2020. My name is Councillor Margaret Thomas, and as Mayor, I will be chairing this meeting. I wish to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land we are meeting on and share this message from the elders. Kaya kaya burias, maman and yoks, nuna de mort, Nitchikula Nalamaya Kalamunda Buja Yayi, Nandurapan, Wadulus Kulan, Jina, Nuna Danicha, Nunga Buja, Nunga Burdias Kura Yayi, Burda, Kedalak, Burda, Kaya, Yunga. Hello, welcome to our leaders, men and women who have come to our place today, this evening, and I'm happy to see you all standing on Noongar land of their leaders, past, present and future. Thank you. The operations of Council and the agenda for this meeting are governed by the provisions of the Local Government Act, standing orders and rules of conduct. All matters of business listed in the agenda will be dealt with as separate decisions of Council. This meeting is also live streamed and I welcome those watching remotely. Thank you for your attendance and interest. Attendance, apologies and leave of absence previously approved to the CEO.
Through the Chair, haven't received any apologies and we don't have any leave previously approved tonight.
Thank you. Public question time. Could I ask Mr. Gordon Mutton to come and ask his question? And Mr. Mutton, if you would please state your name and address just for the minutes.
My name and address, my name is Gordon Mutton, and I've lived in Kalamunda for 50 years, and I've been a member, owned 2 hardware stores, and I've been on various committees, and I've been a volunteer for most of that time.
And your address, please.
My address is, postal address is Box 12, Kalamunda.
Thank you.
Right? Now, my question is not directly with the questions that may be asked tonight. It is, in fact, goes into the question of an earlier part that happened. Is I would like to know, as many of us would like to know, why we changed from a shire to a city. Because you can compare the shire to the city and they're not. At the moment, the city is not performing nowhere like the Shire used to do. That's my question.
Thank you. Would the CEO like to respond?
Through the Chair, the city of Kalamunda became a city largely because of its large population. A shire under the Local Government Act has a population of up to 15,000 people. 15,000, is that correct, governance? 20,000. And a town, there's also a town, and I think a town is around up to 30,000. And beyond 30,000, you can classify yourself as a city. This city has 60,000 residents. It is very much aligned now with other areas of Perth metropolitan area, and Council made that resolution that we should also be a city within the metropolitan area of Perth. Second part of the question was not performing. Yeah, look, that's a matter of opinion, and I think that I'll refer that question to some reading for Mr. Mutton. Perhaps read the annual report and have a look at what that says about how well the city is performing. Also, there's a My Council website that you can look at that shows how we perform against other local governments. So I think with some of that knowledge that may assist in understanding how we are performing. Thank you.
Thank you. Could I invite Marcus Gersler to come and ask your question?
Good evening. Thank you for having me. My question is regarding item 11. This is a motion for the zigzag railway restoration proposal. And there's actually two questions. And first of all, I'd like to commend Council that they're looking at economic development for Kalamunda, which is fantastic. But first question is, from a financial point of view, is this zigzag rejuvenation or restoration proposal a Kalamunda Council project? And secondly, isn't it practice that a proponent would be required to provide such a kind of a feasibility study and information of that kind at their cost and not paid for by the ratepayers?
Thank you for your question. I will refer that to...
Okay. The notice of motion has been put forward by Councillor O'Connor. He will probably speak to it later. In terms of the financial, is it a project that the city is financially supporting? The notice of motion, which hasn't been agreed to yet, does request that we spend some of the ratepayers' money to undertake a pre-feasibility, and that would be as far as any commitment to financial expenditure would go if that motion gets passed tonight. In terms of the proponent, yes, it is most common and usual for a proponent to present an idea or a concept or a proposal to the city, and the city would become the assessing body of that proposal. And that is also a way that could have been taken. However, in this instance, it's come through from a councillor through a notice of motion.
Thank you. I would like to invite David Downing to come and ask his question.
David Downing, 107 Milner Road, High Wycombe. My question is regarding item 10.5.6, Scheme Amendment 105. Council report on the DCP review in July stated in paragraphs 22 and 23, a key area of concern raised through submissions received during advertising of the DCP report was that the city's interpretation of LPS 3 to disregard certain words in the method for calculating contributions would require an amendment to the LPS 3 public advertising and ultimately approval of the Minister of Planning through a scheme amendment. In this regard, the city has been advised that the approach adopted does not constitute nor require an amendment to LPS 3. Further details of this aspect were contained in the confidential attachment of Benefit Council. Why has the city now, 2 months later, decided to initiate the scheme amendment they deemed was not required in July?
Director of Development Services, will you please respond to that question?
Through the Chair, I'll take those questions on notice this evening and provide Mr Downing a comprehensive written response.
Thank you, Mr Downing. We now move on to deputations, and we have 5. I would like to invite the people giving deputations to come and take a seat in the chamber, and the first one is Mr Peter Forrest.
Madam Mayor, councillors, city staff and community present, my name is Peter Forrest, 36 Panoramic Terrace, Kalamunda. This input relates to agenda item 10.2.1, which is a petition that I personally initiated following discussions with friends at Kalamunda Probers Club. We're quite a small group of seniors with wide-ranging different former career backgrounds who meet monthly, and most have lived in Kalamunda for many years. In fact, many having downsized homes close to the town centre. This petition was very quickly signed by 233 persons over only 14 days, all of whom elected yourselves as our councillors to oversee the activities of the Kalamunda District Local Authority. The wording of the petition is self-explanatory, I think. It requests action to facilitate safe walkable access to the Kalamunda town centre that is, in planning terms, a district centre. Although currently declining in commercial value for commercial activity for various reasons, not least as long predicted, being overrun by vehicular traffic, most of which appears now to be using Canning Road as an unplanned for bypass. You could see this as partly an aged care issue, as well as risking the lives of young people from the adjacent district high school further along Canning Road. As you will see from the names and addresses on the petition, elderly residents, those who are no longer able to drive, from all directions, north, south, east and west, living very close to the town centre, do encounter frightening personal risks when being obliged to walk into the town centre for basic necessities and basic shopping. Since all roads that surround a town centre are signed as vehicle priority, that is, despite state planning guidance clearly requiring safe, walkable, pedestrian access to such a district centre. One can sympathise to some extent with city asset staff who have to abide by the highly detailed state main roads department guidelines that are in direct conflict with state planning department guidelines. They do require safe, walkable entry to the town centre. That is why I wrote directly to the State Minister, Rita Safiotti, whose portfolio responsibilities include both planning and main roads, and requested that this obvious policy conflict could be resolved, with Kalamunda as an example. The response so far is positive, to the effect that the policy conflict is acknowledged but not yet resolved. The written advice, you can turn now to the written advice given to councillors tonight by the Director of Assets about the purpose of the petition. Naturally, he's defensive. However, in paragraph 8, summarising the petition, paragraph 8 is certainly a wild exaggeration, saying that when he states the petition would require change to priority of pedestrians over vehicles over every road in its full length, and that would require an Act of Parliament. Of course, that's not what the petition actually requests. Paragraph 9 quotes main roads, for instance, as pedestrians are required generally to be responsible for minimal exposure to road lanes. You can work that out for yourself. It just assumes basically that pedestrians look after themselves. Then paragraph 11, the city is not permitted to install any pedestrian crossings where vehicles are required to stop to allow pedestrians to cross, due to the low volume of pedestrian and vehicle counts in Haines Street, Mead Street and Railway Road. But I ask, whose counts are those? Main roads is implied in that issue. And when? And what is this low volume? Main roads have a very vehicle-centric view of town centre movement in their massive documentation. Much of their rules are not shared overseas, and they even devote 5 pages to pedestrian characteristics, including that of seniors. And this is interesting. They quote, by 65 years, there's a 50% chance of disability, visual, hearing, cognitive impairment, walking ability, or most likely a variable number and intensity of all of these. Yet they omit to relate that to crossings road safety. And I would add to the list impairment of balance. Councillors, not now possibly, but do try standing on one leg with eyes closed to appreciate that issue of balance. It's very, very difficult. So that kind of impairment is not unfamiliar to people. Now imagine a 65-year-old, as described, carrying a bag of daily food shopping, while at the same time watching or listening for fast-moving traffic, to risk crossing a road when drivers just don't see you, while they're watching out for other vehicles in front or behind. On specific examples, there are now hundreds of over 65s living in Kalamunda, in residential areas on the opposite side of Canning Road to the town centre, mainly south of Heath Road. Before IGA closed, they used the IGA for daily provisions without needing to cross. Now they have to cross Canning somehow up to Haynes Street or Mead Street to get into Central Mall, then up the one-way escalator to Coles. The one zebra crossing on Canning close to at the bottom of Hay Street is now in two parts because of a central reserve covered densely with roses. However, what's not perhaps understood unless you drive it regularly, the downhill part of Canning Road is also curved lengthwise. It curves downwards. So that driver vision is actually obscured by the roses until very close to the crossing. This also applies in reverse for drivers headed westward, turning into Heath Road. Again, the same problem. So obvious step one is surely to remove the rose beds. And again, to do with main roads landscape ideas, they wouldn't be there anyway, because there would be an obstruction. Mention is made of a recent activity centre planning in briefing to you by the Director of Assets. Consultation by external consultants for that wrongly began by asking users what do they want rather than what do they do. If they'd asked what do they do, that would have provided a much more useful functional brief. That should have focused solutions on the realities. Instead of that, the plan proposed many millions for planting more trees and in roadways. That would certainly not fit main roads rulings, where they would actually obstruct vehicle movement. Then it ignored the traffic chaos on Canning, near the foot of Haynes Street, where there's a sharp change of direction into Canning Road. Also, no provision for a substantial number of pedestrians crossing from Stirk Medical towards
Excuse
Stirk
me,
House.
Mr Forrest, you're getting awfully close to the 10 minutes if you would like to wind up.
I've got 2 lines. Incidentally, the raised crossing at the foot of Haynes Street is often obstructed by stationary vehicles on it, queuing to enter Canning Road. In summary, Madam Mayor, Council, instead of just noting the position, Council could advise to use it as community engagement for user briefing on any future work in Kalamunda by the city in Kalamunda.
Thank you, Mr Forrest.
Can I just apologise on behalf of the owner of the Best Drop Tavern, the people at Pharmacy 777 and the Old Mates Cafe, all of which would like to come along, but they couldn't this evening for various personal reasons with business. But
you,
they did
Mr.
help
Forrest.
to circulate the petition.
Thank you. Can I go to the Director of Asset Services to make a comment, particularly about main roads?
Thank you, through the Chair, and thank you, Mr Forrest, for your deputation, and I'm glad that you do recognise the challenges we have seeking changes to pedestrian issues on the road reserves, which are under the purview of main roads for approval, and they have, as we set out in the report, the issue of warrants. However, I have some good news, or some positive news to share. Over the last week, there's been some progress made with main roads on quite a few issues. Firstly, main roads have now produced a new policy statement regarding how approval for traffic lights occur. And this would encompass traffic lights to be used for pedestrian crossings. And they have advised the city that the Main Roads WA have given in principle support to the installing of a traffic light controlled pedestrian crossing in Canning Road, proximate to where the existing zebra crossing is. Now that's the first stage of a 3-stage process under Main Roads' new policy. The second stage is that the city would have to undertake a traffic assessment report provide community consultation, and then provide concept designs of this proposed pedestrian traffic light crossing. We'll start that process now. That will include revisiting what is the most appropriate location for a set of traffic lights on Canning Road to do the pedestrian crossing. Once we produce that concept, I'll bring that back to council, and then that will be submitted to Main Roads WA, who will then, the next stage, they will endorse that concept. Then it proceeds to the final stage, stage 3, which is developing the detailed design, which Main Roads would then approve consistent with all their rules and regulations about signs and lines, etc. At that point in time, we'd have to have locked in funding to do the construction. That's the first piece of news in that regard from Main Roads. The second piece is the city has been trying for some time to look at reducing speed zones in and around the Kalamunda town centre. We produced a submission to Main Roads and just received advice that they will approve reposting Haynes Street to a 40-kilometre speed limit, reposting Barber Street to a 40-kilometre speed limit, and reposting Central Mall to a 40-kilometre speed limit, which is moot anyway because as the concept designs and as the construction for the Central Mall works undertake, we'll probably get that down to 10k actual by the end of the works anyway. We did ask and they rejected a proposal to reduce the 50k zone in Canning Road to 40k and the 60k down to 50. They rejected it on the basis that it's a district distributor A road and a 40k zone is inappropriate. Moreover, they see Canning Road as a high place value traffic movement road. Similarly, they use the same rationale for Mead Street and Railway Road. Now, we don't believe the logic sits there as much as what they thought, and this will be part of some future discussions between the department and the city and potentially the minister and the mayor, that we'd like to progress those decisions and get them reviewed. So that's what's happening in the world of pedestrian movements. The final comment I'd like to make, and Mr. Forrest said I misinterpreted the petition. The petition wording was quite specific. Alter the current priority given to vehicle traffic on all roads to give safe and convenient priority access to the town centre for pedestrians and persons with mobility. Roads under the Act are for vehicles, and if we need to give priority to pedestrians over cars, the Act has to be changed. That's the advice we were given.
Thank you very much, Director. Councillors, do you have any other questions for Mr. Forrest? Councillor Sewell.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Forrest, for your advocacy on behalf of the Probus Club. In light of the response that you've received this evening, does that alleviate some of the concerns that you have raised and that the Probus Club was seeking?
I knew about most of those anyway, but the issue that I'm still pursuing, as you know, with Minister Safiotti is the compatibility of policy between Main Roads and planning, which has not yet been resolved. And her office basically assures me that there will be a portfolio answer, consolidate those two policies somehow or other. So,
Follow-up question, Councillor Sewell.
Thank you for providing that information in terms of follow-up with the state government. From a city perspective, though, because we're the city of Kalamunda, has the issues that have been raised via your petition been addressed?
raised by who?
By yourself and Probus.
Well, obviously, until the pedestrian crossings are made available, it can't be resolved. So the issue still remains. Those people, disadvantaged people because of age and disabilities, have to cross now if they don't drive into the town centre daily to get their shopping. So it can't be resolved until that is provided, that safe conduct is provided, which according to planning it would be.
Thank you very much, Mr Forrest, and thank you for giving your deputation. I would now like to invite Mr Peter Wright to come and give his deputation. And I just remind you, Mr Wright, you have 10 minutes, or less if you want. And if you turn your microphone on.
The switch.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for allowing me to do this. I want to speak in support of Councillor Dylan O'Connor's motion about the zigzag railway. Firstly, it's important to remember that this very thoroughly prepared motion is not asking Council for a yes or no on the zigzag railway, but simply to decide whether or not to take a proper look at this proposal to check whether it's viable. Any concerns anyone has about costings, safety or anything else can and should be addressed during this checking out process, and any such concerns should not, I think, prevent anyone from supporting this motion. As the motion itself mentions, the cost of checking out the viability of the project is really quite trivial, especially when you put it next to the incredible benefits that would come by way of economic development if the railway was operating. I became interested in this project relatively recently, and I've naturally asked many questions myself. And I've been reassured and impressed to find out that each issue that concerned me has already been looked into in great detail.
Mr Wright, it was remiss of me not to ask you to just state your address for the minutes, please.
Oh, sorry, yeah, my address is 19 Western Street, Carlisle.
Thank you.
But I'm on the committee of the association that's behind this proposal.
Thank you. Please continue.
Sorry, yeah. I've discussed this vision with many people since I've been involved, and the universal response that I've received is, what a brilliant idea. Everyone I know wants to ride on this train. So, yes, international and interstate tourists, great, but there are also 2 million local people who want to do this. The association behind the proposal is very fortunate in having highly skilled engineers who are more than capable of making this happen, and whose track record shows clearly that they can do so. When you combine this with the commitments they have obtained from volunteer groups to give their time in helping to build and then run the railway, you'll realise that this really is a unique proposition which can deliver this railway for less than a quarter of the amount it would cost as a full-blown commercial project. And the eco steam engine, which is part of this proposal, well, very simply, no one else on this planet has this. I should also mention the inclusion of Aboriginal involvement in this proposal. It's proposed that the fleet of shuttle buses for all tours, not just sites of Aboriginal significance, but to all tourist venues, are conducted by the Aboriginal community, rangers, drivers, tour guides, etc. And this is another example of how this zigzag railway can help bring the community together. When I look at the infrastructure we have around here in Kalamunda, then look at what can be done with these assets and consider the positive effect that doing this will have on so many aspects of life in Kalamunda and the surrounding community, it brings me to a very simple conclusion. We'd be balmy if we didn't do this. Now, in conclusion, I say I don't know much about how councils operate, but one does hear all sorts of pretty weird stories. So I'd like to think that they don't apply to this council, and I would ask sincerely that everyone remembers that the issues being discussed are out there and not in here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr Wright. Councillors, do you have any questions? Councillor Sewell.
Can we just have confirmation of the total cost of the project, please?
Mr Wright.
That's a matter to be gone into surely during the process. Me sitting here trying to tell you the total cost, but in round figures, we've got a figure of less than 50 million.
So
Follow-up question,
Follow-up
Councillor
question.
Sewell?
Thank you for the follow-up question, Madam Chair. So was a feasibility study included as part of that estimation? It's a significant amount of money. 15,000 seems somewhat minuscule in comparison.
As the amount has been carefully costed, but there are a lot of variables. That's why it's a bit of a ballpark figure at the moment. It's a community project, the way it's been put together, which means a lot of volunteer labour and associations are involved. That's what's helped to keep it down. I think if you want to look at feasibility closely, then that's what is being proposed, that you do have a close look at everything that we put under it. There are so many variables that it's hard to give a definitive answer just like that, because it could be misleading.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Councillor Giardina.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Mr Wright, has any member of your organisation or the Zigzag Rail people, restoration proposal people, have they made any effort to go and visit some of the people that live along those roads coming up from the bottom of the hill upwards?
I'm not sure of the exact extent of any consultations. I think I can't answer that for sure, because they've been speaking to all sorts of people. Where they live, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm just concerned that probably they have been speaking to a lot of people, but the ones that are going to be impacted by all this, maybe they haven't spoken to them. That's my only concern.
Thank you, Councillor.
Yes, sorry, I've just received a semaphore. Yes, they have.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions, councillors? Thank you very much for coming to speak to us, Mr Wright. And I now would like to invite Mr Peter Bolden to come in and give his deputation. Mr Bolden, will you kindly state your address, and you have 10 minutes or less if you wish.
Yes, I'm Peter Bolden from 55A Snowball Road, Kalamunda. I'm here to speak in support of the motion as stated in the agenda item 11.1. But before I would start, I'd like to reiterate what Mr Wright has said, that this motion is not to approve the go-ahead of a railway, but to further investigate in more detail its feasibility. This is something we've been working on for a number of years, and we would be happy to share our knowledge, costs, data we have with any committee that was formed if this motion was passed. So, moving on, I share with, like many other people, a passion for revitalising the Kalamunda town site and the Hills area. And I believe the Zigzag Railway can do this and much more. The Hills area economy is shifting from orchards and agriculture to tourism. Some businesses are doing well, others are struggling. But whether we like to admit it or not, the original Kalamunda town site is slowly dying. Most of it is a result of the inevitable shift in the retail environment. We now shop in big box stores or on the internet. We don't do our weekly shopping walking up and down Haynes Street anymore. And that's not going to change. So it's a reality we have to live with. And witness the closure of the many businesses. The big banks are gone or going. The tab has gone. a supermarket, along with the cafes, restaurants and a pharmacy, they've shut their doors. The Sunday market, in my opinion, and I visit every week, appears to be in a death spiral. We are descending into a ghost town that is a purely dormitory suburb. We are losing our heart as a community. This is something I believe the council should be very concerned about. So the question is, if we want a vibrant town centre and a thriving community, what can be done? Obviously, we need to attract people that will spend money to visit Kalamunda and the Hills area. How to do this? Tourism, in my opinion. And it's not just my opinion. The state government has recognised tourism as one path to reshape our state economy. For example, they spent $400 million upgrading the WA Museum with the intent of possibly attracting 75,000 new visitors. Our vision is to create a world-class tourist attraction that will attract similar numbers, but for a fraction of the cost. And just as an aside, I've just heard that the Dufkin is moving to Sydney. I don't know whether you've heard that. Western Australia will need something to replace this and showcase our heritage. Kalamunda and the Hills area is on the doorstep of a major Australian city with a population of around 2 million people. The customer base is large. Perth is the main aviation gateway to Western Australia for interstate and international visitors. Fremantle is becoming a hub for an increasing number of cruise ships. Tourists and more tourists with money to spend looking for a quality attraction that doesn't need a day or more's travel to get there. I don't know if any of you have visited Castle Deer on a weekend when the model trains are running. Queues nearly 100 metres long just to ride a model train. Imagine the numbers a real heritage railway would attract. Imagine 50 to 100,000 more tourists per annum visiting the area and spending money. The local economy will be transformed. Businesses will thrive and expand. New businesses will open. There will be local employment growth. Kalamunda and the Hills will come alive with the sound of cash registers ringing. What more could you ask for? The Bickley Valley provides an embryo of the new age of tourism. But we need more. The restored heritage zigzag railway will be the unifying project to make this area a mecca for tourists. I don't know whether you've had a chance to view the short video that was supplied that gives an encapsulation of the project. And it's not just about a railway, it's about the whole concept, the infrastructure, the markets, the tourism, the employment opportunities. So bear that in mind, and I just urge you to get behind this motion so that we can formally begin to flesh out this proposal. The zigzag railway will, and I say will, not may, propel this area into a new era of prosperity. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Bolden. Councillors, do you have any questions? Councillor Sewell.
I thank Mr Bolden for his advocacy on this incredible project. I'm not sure if Mr Bolden is aware of the current consultation that is taking place in relation to the zigzag and its future. I was wondering if you and the supporters of this project would be willing to wait until we receive that consultation back to allow the community to have some kind of say in terms of the future of the zigzag, of which obviously has some impacts for them. And, you know, because we're looking at that consultation concluding promptly, and I'm wondering whether that would be something worth considering.
Yeah, the microphone, please.
We would consider if the motion was passed, part and parcel of the work will obviously be to include the community's expectations, wishes, and so on. I believe it's important just to get it going. Let's start the work. Let's get the consultation formally finished. We have talked with many people, many business owners, and I don't recall a negative comment apart from the occasional Facebook posts we get from outsiders, you know, that oppose it just because that's their way. But we would be very happy to work with any community groups. We're happy to share with what we have already, and it's a proposal to let's look at it, let's get it moving. It's got such potential. If we're not careful, we could get bogged down with endless iterations of community consultation.
Are there any other questions, councillors? I have a question, Mr Bolden. I was wondering if you had made any inroads into finding the 50 million that was suggested is needed.
Well, the 50 million, that is a very ballpark figure. We have in our estimations initially, and it is based on how you want to do the work and the timescale involved. If you want to fast track it, it costs more. Our concept is a volunteer-based organisation, very similar to the Lithgow Railway in New South Wales and Puffin Billy in Melbourne, all done by volunteers at no cost. If we have the time to do that, there's no reason why we can't. Obviously, it's a much cheaper option, probably in the region we reckon of with a bit of infrastructure, etc. Low figure would be about 20 million, based on purely volunteer efforts. If we have to start paying contractors to do the work to fast track it, obviously the cost goes up substantially. How much just depends on, you know, how long is a bit of string really, in terms of how many contractors you would have to do the work. We have volunteers and people that have expressed interest in providing their knowledge, their labour for free. And that's, if we carry on with that concept, we're talking around about the 20 million mark.
So, Mr Bolden, you didn't really answer my question. My question was, do you have any funding for this project, regardless of how much it costs?
We haven't got any firm commitments. What we have had is a lot of, yes, this sounds good. It's getting over that first hurdle, you know. If there's a backing from the council or government or whatever, they're going to be a much more available to make their commitments firm. We've had lots of expressions of interest for funding, but that's as far as it goes at the moment.
Thank you. Councillor Cannon, do you have a question?
Yeah, sorry, through the chair. I just need to know, are these steam trains or diesel locomotives, or how are the trains?
No, this is a unique concept. It's called an eco train. Now, if you go back to the old steam engines, they burn coal, they produce lots of sparks, fire hazard, inefficient. Diesel engines, they don't have the public appeal. So we have designed what's called an eco engine. Burns LPG. There is a closed system for the water consumption and reuse and heat reclaiming to make it very efficient and extremely fireproof, for want of a better word. So, and this eco engine is a unique West Australian concept that could be manufactured and sold elsewhere. In our discussions with other groups, they've said, wow, that's a good idea, because I'm trying not to avoid getting into absolute detail, but the regulator, the railway regulator, they're very concerned about old engines running. So we've solved that by essentially having a brand new engine, brand new design, totally computer controlled according to the latest requirements of the regulators, which means you can get insurance and it's safe and efficient.
Thank you, Mr. Bolden.
So
Follow-up
sorry, just a follow-up question.
Councillor Cannon.
Who designed it, and has it actually been approved, or who's approved it?
Well, the concept design, I'd have to point you towards Mr. John Edmonds, who could answer a lot of your detailed questions on that. The concept has been run by the railway regulators, and they don't have a problem with it. But again, this is a feasibility study. You know, this can be done, but we now have to take this next step and start formal designs, formal approvals and such like.
Thank you.
Sorry, follow-up question. The railway bodies that you're talking about, are they a body corporate or a government?
It's a government regulatory authority. You know, they govern all railways.
Are there any other questions, councillors? Thank you very much for coming to speak to us, Mr. Bolden, and I would now like to invite Vicky Laurie to come and give her deputation. Thank you very much. If you kindly state your address for us.
Yes, Vicky Laurie from 60 John Farrant Drive, Gooseberry Hill.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm here to talk to the same item. I think it's 11.1, the zigzag railway proposal. I suppose I just want to say that, I mean, I love people's enthusiasm for things. I'm all in favour of lots of great ideas, but I'm afraid I'm going to be one of those insiders with a rather different view of this. I'm absolutely perplexed by this proposal to drive a train, literally and metaphorically, through one of the most beautiful areas of Kalamunda's bushland that really deserves to be called the King's Park of the Hills. There are many people in this community, councillors and staff members here, who've worked incredibly hard to save the zigzag from the problems that it has already. It took huge effort on many people's part to focus attention on the mounting destruction that's taken place over the years. Too many fires, hoons driving around most nights, especially in summer, with squealing brakes, keeping people awake and worried that the cars are going to go into their front yards. Burnouts, backing cars into and over the vegetation. I mean, I think you all know these stories. Tons of rubbish scattered in the bush that one Kalamunda city worker told me took 12 hours a week of his time to go and pick up. And those costly hours are multiplied because I think there are a number of workers who have had to go and do the same. So the 6-month ban that your council kindly agreed to down part of the zigzag was incredibly welcome and, in our view, very sensible. It still allows people to drive down to the 2 car park areas and enjoy that fantastic view, made more fantastic right now by a wealth of spring blossom in pink, yellow and white. And as some of you would know, there are plants there that we don't find anywhere else on the east coast of Australia. You've heard the word biodiversity, I won't go on. But it also allows for tranquil walking for bike riders to travel its length without having to dodge car traffic. It's given us all a kind of breathing space, time to look at the zigzag with fresh eyes, free from the mounds of fast food rubbish, free from the really awful sight of 100-year-old grass trees toppled into the road. And it opens up the hope that we can do really visionary things in future with the zigzag. If money is to be spent, let's spend it on a feasibility study for a beautiful, award-winning viewing platform overlooking the Scarp, its magnificent Christmas trees, down across the sand plain to Perth. If it's an award-winning design and it's simple and in harmony with the natural environment, it's just the right location for newlyweds to take pictures, for families to release balloons in memory of loved ones, as I've seen people do on the zigzag, to have a coffee cart turn up perhaps, or a place just to have fun. It opens up the potential for the recovered bush to have signposted botanical trails, maybe the odd sculptural seat along the way for contemplation. So much more can be made of it and the wonderful walking trails that connect the zigzag already to the city along Railway Reserve. So more people on foot or bikes can enjoy walking in the bush, stopping at coffee shops and art venues along the way. And just as the city staff and its residents have held some wonderful musical events at the zigzag in the past, we can have more, dependent only on people's imagination and sense of fun, and not on spending huge sums of money or building steel and concrete diversions that are always costly to maintain. The one thing that COVID has taught us all around Australia, from Melbourne to Darwin to Perth, is that humans need to escape to open spaces, green spaces, whatever natural public space we can hang on to as a community for dear life at a time when our built environment is closing in around us. And another thing that climate change is teaching us is to hang on to our vegetation, our trees, the complex plants and animals and birds that are uniquely and proudly Western Australian. The zigzag bush has never been comprehensively cleared. It looks much as it did hundreds of years ago, perhaps minus a few big trees. It deserves to be cherished. So please help us cherish it for what it is and not turn it into a theme park, which it is not. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillors, do you have any questions? Thank you very much for coming to speak to us. I would like to invite Mr. Andy Farrant to come and give his deputation. If you would kindly state your address, Mr. Farrant.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yes, 60 John Farrant Drive in Gooseberry Hill. I'm also here to talk about agenda item number 11. And councillors, thank you very much. Thank you for having me here to address you tonight as a community member. I'm not quite sure if we're in a Harry Potter movie or we've gone back to the future. Some of you may recall that in my professional life I'm a consultant. In that role and with other diverse backgrounds, I've led and partnered a number of infrastructure proposals for local and state government entities. Drawing on that experience, I suggest to you the proposed costs for a pre-feasibility study, as proposed, are dangerously low, potentially delivering a disappointing and unusable result. As for the proposed capital cost of this proposal, that too is not real. Indeed, a local community member I'm sitting almost next to in the gallery, who's an engineer, he's got his PhD in engineering. I mouthed to him when the $50 million mark was mentioned, is that realistic? And he said many times more. Sadly, there's no mention of operating or maintenance costs in that figure. I began reading the Zigzag renewal proposal with interest, and I watched the video. Not since I read nightly stories to my two daughters during their primary school years have I seen such a work of fiction that I found in these two presentations. The hyperbole of ideas and the hubris of them out-Enid Mrs. Blyton, surpassed the Cat in the Hat, and made the works of J.C. Rowling, in my view, look like Einstein theorems. If this proposal is funded to just a quarter of its proposed scope, the city as we know it will be a very different and much poorer place. Roads will be dangerous as shared carriageways. The city's library, history village, ambulance hall, indeed possibly the city offices will need to be demolished to make way for this tram, or is it a train? This is an idea that is 129 years out of date. What is certain, though, is that much of the bush close to the heart of Kalamunda will be removed if it's approved, adding to the heating effect of the already 75 to 80% loss of tree canopy along through Kalamunda and to Gooseberry Hill. Based on statements of what I'm going to call the Dream Train video, passengers will spend much time stationary as the train climbs up the zigzag and stops regularly all the way to Pickering Brook. Passengers may be advised to pack pyjamas and a toothbrush. The impact on the amenity of the places it would pass through would be shattered. The railway line will cleave central Perth in two halves, at a time when the state government has spent hundreds of millions of dollars burying the city tracks, that too, to rejoin the two halves of central Perth. Councillors, I ask you, where will the volunteers come from to operate and maintain the Dream Train? Where will the Aboriginal people, and on what authority do these proponents speak on behalf of Aboriginal people? Where will these people come from? Sadly, though, these dreams of the lifelong past, seem to be plucked from the air costings, have a much darker underbelly. There is a concerning element to the way this proposal has been put to the city and its community. It involves unprofessional behaviour that could be considered by some as threatening. I understand that city staff and even some councillors may well have witnessed behaviour on this in the first hand. I'm also aware that members of the community have been verbally abused, and behaviour, if ever displayed by my children when they were young, that would have earned a clear rebuke and an ambiguous sanction. Not acceptable behaviour. City staff have set out options for you, councillors, in their prepared report in response to this motion. Give this project a wafer-thin legitimacy by putting unbudgeted funds into a study at a time of serious fiscal constraint, or reject the proposal of the Dream Train and pursue other community uniting options that the Zigzag offers, and which have not yet been fully explored. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillors, do you have any questions of Mr Farrant? Councillor O'Connor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr Farron. Just to clarify, as the mover of this motion, when you referenced the darker underbelly and unprofessional behaviour and verbal abuse, were you referencing me?
No,
Thank you.
absolutely not.
Are there any other questions? Thank you very much for coming
Thank
to
you, Madam
speak
Mayor.
to us.
Thank you, councillors.
We now move on to applications for leave of absence, and we have one. Can I have a mover that Councillor Kathy Ritchie be granted leave of absence for the period 19th to the 23rd of October 2020? Councillor Sewell, a seconder. Councillor Boyd. Is there any debate? All those in favour? That is carried unanimously. You may go on holidays, Councillor Ritchie. Confirmation of minutes from the previous meeting. Can I have a mover that the minutes of the Ordinary Council meeting held on the 25th of August 2020 are confirmed as a true and accurate record of the proceedings? Councillor Blair, seconded by Councillor Stallard. All in favour? Carried unanimously. On the basis of the above motion, I now sign the minutes as a true and accurate record of the meeting of the 25th of August 2020. Announcements by the member presiding without discussion. Councillors, with your permission, I would like to bring the motion regarding the zigzag to the front of the reports. And I would ask just to allow the members of the gallery to leave if they would like to. And I would ask councillors, does anyone have an objection to that? Thank you very much. Matters for which the meeting may be closed. When we come to 10.5.4 and 10.5.6, I will ask you if you wish to close the meeting. Otherwise, we will forward those reports. And 10.5.10. Disclosure of interest. I will ask the CEO if there are any.
Through the Chair, yes. I have a disclosure from Councillor Giardina in relation to item 10.5.4 on page 58, the COVID innovation grants. He is declaring an impartiality interest because one of the grants is for the Darling Range Seniors Hub, of which he is a member of that group. The second is from myself, Rhonda Hardy, in relation to 10.510, page 129, in relation to the CEO Performance Review Committee, and I am declaring a direct financial interest as this item relates to my employment with the city. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you very much. So we are going to the motion, which is on page 133. The Zigzag Railway Restoration Proposal. We have a mover and a seconder. You all have it in front of you and read the rationale. So I will go to the mover, and it's a very long rationale. If you can make it shorter, I would love that. Thank you, Councillor O'Connor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I thought I would summarise it down to one page. Councillors, obviously, doing your due diligence, you would have read the rationale and the wording of the recommendation.
Madam Chair, before we go ahead, I just want to foreshadow an alternative motion.
Thank you, Councillor Giardina.
And so I won't read my rationale because I know you're across it. You've probably read it a few times. So I will say this. To date, the City of Kalamunda has not undertaken any sort of technical analysis of this proposal, which has been around for many years, not in the last 2 years, but around 20 years, as far as I'm aware. Lots of people, lots of professionals and experts from a variety of fields have had a very good look at this idea over the years, and yet the City has never taken an official position. What I'm proposing is that the City has a look at the big things that might prevent us from supporting the idea. We know this project will affect our community. Some things might impact our community so much that the City decides it can't support it. At least we'll know. However, some of the things that we currently think are insurmountable might turn out to be easily overcome. We don't know. We are the custodians of the City's assets. And yes, we could sit back and play our role as assessors of the proposal, or we could be proactive and have a look at it. We had a speaker earlier this evening, Mr. Geisler, who asked if this is normal practice, and I can say it probably isn't normal practice for Kalamunda, but maybe that's part of the problem. The proposal highlights the tourism and economic development opportunities that are possible. I wouldn't say guaranteed. I don't know. The finance is not a factor for us to consider, and the cost of the project, the maintenance, all that sort of stuff, the viability is not really what I'm looking at. I'm looking at how this proposal impacts on our community and whether it's something that we could, in principle, support. The opportunities could see the revitalisation of the Kalamunda town centre and the wider hills and foothills districts, and see Kalamunda become a destination of choice for day tripping families and tourists from Perth and beyond. The economic development opportunities include increased retail and commercial activity and sales, increased investment into existing privately owned retail infrastructure, and an increase in local employment. In the event that any proponent or consortium was able to attract the significant funding required, the first thing they will do is contact the city and find out what the city's position is. If we don't have one, the money will never be committed and it will never go anywhere. The cost of doing this work could be in the order of $10,000 to $20,000. If the project has merit and the economic benefits stack up, then this initial spend is quite insignificant and will quickly be realised as economic development increases as a result. At this stage, the Council is only considering conducting a pre-feasibility and is not committing support for the project, and shouldn't do so until there is more certainty on the unknown variables that impact the City of Kalamunda and the community. Oh, sorry, still going. Just seeing. I thought you were okay. Nearly finished. During this COVID time, the city is looking at awarding thousands of dollars for things that will stimulate the local economy and create employment opportunities, and this proposal could be viewed in the same light. Pretty soon, the Kalamunda Town Centre will not have an operating bank. Crab's IGA has gone, and we have empty shops and office space all around the place. Ultimately, if we as a council are serious about the revitalisation of the Kalamunda Town Centre and the hills and foothills area, then this motion to initiate the investigation ought to be supported. Thank you.
I'm going to the seconder to speak, but then before we do debate, I'll just ask Councillor Giardina to outline, but not speak on his alternative motion. But let's go to the seconder first.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I will be brief. The reason why I'm supporting this is my understanding is that ultimately the city is the approving authority for this matter, which has been subject to much discussion both locally and further afield for quite some time. And as was mentioned by one of the speakers, there's obviously been some discussions around some potential funding, but that can't go any further until there is some surety being able to be provided as to whether that's going to be supported. I'm aware that several councillors have engaged with some of the members of the Zigzag Railway project team, but is it a viable project? I guess that's what we're ultimately trying to find out through this motion. In the current environment, with the current situations and the current population that we have, having a quick look as a approving body, this will provide the project committee some feedback, some direction as to where they should be taking their project and provide them some direction given that we are reviewing future options for the zigzag itself, this could not be at a more timely time. That doesn't even make sense. But let's go with it. Yes. So I think it's a pre-feasibility is a good way to move forward, because, like I said, we are the approving body, and everybody ultimately is looking for some direction from the city.
Thank you, Councillor Boyd. Councillor Giardina, would you just outline your alternative motion, and then we'll go back to the debate on Councillor O'Connor's motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, but I want to just preface before I start that at no time in my alternative motion that I'm seeking council support to actually initiate the rail for the zigzag. It's not my intention. Basically, what I'm trying to do is ascertain from different government departments and advisory committees more information that we badly need as a council, whether it be now or in the future. So basically what it is, Madam Chair, is that council defer the undertaking any investigations or actions regarding the zigzag railway restoration proposal until after the current community consultation is completed and reported back to council. We currently have a community consultation happening with a zigzag area, so that's the one that I want. We're awaiting. I understand it's closed now, so staff have to collate all that information. And two is refer the zigzag railway restoration proposal to the following city advisory committees, community groups, key government departments and local members of Parliament for their views, regulatory barriers that may exist and advice on this proposal. And then it lists the from A to R, the different areas where I believe they should go to obtain information for our officers and us.
Thank you, Giardina. Now we're going into debate. A speaker against the motion.
Sorry, I just wanted to foreshadow an amendment to Councillor Giardina's motion.
Can we just hear your amendment? Can we just outline your amendment quickly, and then we'll go into debate?
Thank you. So it's very much in line with Councillor Giardina's motion, but taking into consideration point number 1, and after we've received the community consultation, then effectively taking on point 2, post-consultation from the community.
Thank you, Councillor Sewell. Is there...
I think we need to go back and deal with the substantive now. We've heard that there's a couple on the floor. Yeah.
That's what I'm going to do now. So we've had a mover and a seconder. Is there a speaker against the Councillor O'Connor, Councillor Boyd motion? Councillor Ritchie.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to speak against the motion. I think in some ways what we heard this evening was an encapsulation of what it is likely to be if we consider looking at continuing with this notion. We've heard very passionate speakers for, we've heard very passionate speakers against. And it really comes down to, before we think about a pre-feasibility study, we need to know if we have the council, if council has community support to even consider progressing this. We do represent our constituents, and it concerns me that we have a proposition in front of us that has the potential to be incredibly divisive right across the city. So I would be speaking against this motion, certainly until the very least we have an idea of the 1,300 submissions that have been made to the zigzag consultation that's currently underway, and to have some idea of what the feeling is out there amongst our constituents. Thank you.
Speaker for the motion. Councillor Stallard.
Yes, thank you. Just to be a little contrary, which is unusual for my personality. I suppose, thinking about this one, it would be a little remiss of me not to indicate that I asked for this very thing to happen when I first got on council, and also when I stood for state parliament. I was looking into this, and there were a lot of hurdles and a lot of problems that happened then, and on those grounds alone I think I should be pushing forward and supporting this one. But I would like to raise a few items here that have concerns and issues. As for the the public consultation on the zigzag, it wasn't raised as an issue. So I don't believe that many of the comments in there, by the residents, would reflect on this. So we wouldn't gain a lot from that aspect alone. And I just don't think the consultation would cover that effectively, even though some may mention it, having some understanding, but because it wasn't out there during a lot of this consultation time, I don't believe it would have been included in there. So I don't see how pausing to get the outcome of that consultation and doing it after that would be any different to doing it now, because it wasn't an issue, it wasn't on the agenda at that time. It can be at another time if this moves forward, and we're not asking it to go ahead as a project. We're looking at it, and I think scoping would be a better word. I think there were a couple of important issues that are there, and I agree that Kalamunda, the city itself, is in decline. And I think there's going to be potential greater decline, and it may give us that boost, that stimulus to push our economy along again. It would certainly revitalise some of the areas and have the potential for open up other areas if it went ahead. But that's long term, and that's a long way off, but at least we should be moving forward. One thing that I think is important as well, we often refer to the division between up the hill and down the hill. This is a golden opportunity to link them up to a binding inclusiveness that we could have between up the hill and down the hill. And I think it's a wonderful opportunity for us to share it as a total community rather than a separated community. And it certainly reflects many aspects of our tourism strategy: access to facilities, natural and built form, creative investments, inspire visitors, encourage innovative and collaborative tourism, and that supports local businesses and drives economic growth. The one thing I was a bit concerned about by some of the presentations that were against it was that we are not asking people to destroy the zigzag, the beauty of it. We're encouraging people to enjoy it, but enjoying it by another means, not by walking up. What if you can't walk up or ride a bike? And what if we may close it to cars? Or who knows what that may be? But it's another means. We're not asking to destroy the environment. We're helping in a way of protecting it and then giving people the opportunity. And can I be a little mercenary realm here? Kalamunda needs people to come from outside to bring their money in. We need and want their money, so the more we can get from outside to come in, and we can take their money, which is part being mercenary, but in particular we want them to enjoy and be inspired by our area. But at the same time, they can donate to the well-being of our city rather than local people having to try and sustain our economy. Thank you.
With your indulgence, I would like to speak against the motion. I've got 5 points: money, perception, precedent, timing and risk. Money, I don't think 15,000 will make any inroads into the many issues that we need to look at, and we're looking more at a much larger sum for a pre-feasibility to have any worth. And should we be spending ratepayers' money on a project that is not ours? Perception, if we do a pre-feasibility, there is the perception that we, the city, are doing this project, and we're not. We don't do pre-feasibilities on other projects. Why are we doing it on this one? Precedent, same reason. If we do a pre-feasibility on someone else's project, are we going to do that on everybody's project that comes to us and wants a pre-feasibility? Timing, you've all heard that we are awaiting the report. And can we justify spending ratepayers' money at this time when lots of people have lost their jobs, the country is in recession? Can we justify spending a serious amount of money on a pre-feasibility for a project that is not ours? Risk is set out very well in page 138. We need to look at the risks the city faces before we do this. My last point is I refer back to the question asked by Marcus Giesler. The normal process is an applicant comes to the city with all the issues solved that were paid for by the applicant, and the city assesses it as a DA or planning assessment. That's our role. It's not our job to decide if a project is viable. It is our job to assess a project when it comes to the city in a normal way. So I'm not saying, I understand lots of people would love to see Puffing Billy come up the zigzag, but I'm saying I don't think the city should be using ratepayers' money and our staff time to look at a project that is not a city project. Is there a speaker for? I will allow other speakers. There is another speaker against. Councillor Blair?
I'd like to speak against if possible. Yep. I'd like to speak on behalf of the zigzag and that piece of land that everyone does love. Everyone has got a story about it. We've fought hard, all of us, to work together just to put a temporary close on it so the zigzag can be protected for a little while we try and work out what we're going to do with it. And I just find that we haven't even had the consultation come out and we're throwing the train out in front of the horse, to coin that phrase, but change it to train. I just think we need to hear what the consultation is, find out what the residents, the locals and visitors and tourists want to do or think about doing, and then we will have a definitive plan of how we can try and move forward without getting the word railway zigzag into the forefront of people's minds and on the front paper of the local newspaper. I think we need to finish the process that we have in place before we even start talking about this one.
Thank you, Councillor Blair. I'll ask again, is there a speaker for? Is there anyone else who would like to speak against? I will go back to the mover for a right of reply.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A couple of good points were raised. Just on the timing, my response to why now would be exactly that we've just gone out to the community and now is the time to do it. So when you're looking at what you're going to do with a city asset, such as the zigzag scenic drive, and if you're going to only look at these things in isolation, you're not really doing justice to the city, to tourism and to the Kalamunda Town Centre and all the other options that haven't been explored. So the reason for the timing is get it on the table and let's take those 1,300 responses and as well look at the possibility. Like, will the city ever support this? I don't know. And if there are major reasons why, engineering or whatever, major reasons why we can't support it, at least then we'll know. And we can take it off the table and then focus on other options. But if you don't look at it, if you don't do anything, you'll never do anything. So that's the reason why. Why now? That's why. So it's on the table and it's under consideration. Why should the city pay for a report when the proponent can pay for their own report? Well, I guess I'm a bit of a cynic sometimes and been on council for a while, and I suggest that on more than a couple of occasions, reports have come to us funded by various people with, I feel, a desire, a predetermined outcome. And so I would want the city to fund its own independent report and not take the word of someone else who has been paid for or been paid by a proponent. So that's the reason why I would put that forward. $15,000, I'm happy if there's a view that it's going to go more than that, I'd say we'll cap it at $15,000 and come back if there's more work to be done. And if we can't get a reasonable enough snapshot for $15,000, then maybe we're drilling down too much. A pre-feasibility is not a feasibility, it is just having a once-over. Are there any reasons why we shouldn't support it? If there's not, we can say there's no reasons why we can't support a proper feasibility, which would then go into viability and the funding and the boom gates and the tickets and everything else. Councillor Stallard made a good point about bringing outside money in. Obviously, we've got a tourism committee and they are looking at doing things like signage and other things, but really, if we don't do something big for this town centre, it will dwindle down and I wouldn't say cease to exist, but the relevance will fall away. So we need to do something. We need to look outside the square, and this is just one thing. It's not. I'm not saying I think we should definitely build it, and if we don't, it's a crooked idea. But if you don't entertain things, if you don't have a good look at them, you'll never know. And like I said, you'll never do anything. The environment was raised as one of the reasons why we shouldn't do it. Again, that's one of the reasons why we should do it. It is the King's Park of the Hills, and it belongs to all of us, and we should be proud of it, and we should keep the cars off the vegetated sections, and the four-wheel drives coming down and ruining the area. I think was disgraceful, which is why I supported the temporary closure. But there are some really, really nice environmental values out there, which I think everyone would like to be a part of and have access to. I think I'll leave it there. I'll just finish off with, if this motion is lost as referenced by the CEO in the response, I will follow her advice, she has offered to bring a report to the December OCM, and the report identifies issues and major constraints, and that doesn't need a budget or any amount set aside for spending. So if you councillors, if you're of a mind not to support this motion, I would encourage you to support a second foreshadowed motion, which is along the lines of what the CEO has put forward, and not support the motion put forward by Councillor Giardina, which does involve significant costs. Thank you.
Thank you for an excellent right of reply, Councillor O'Connor. I'm going to put this motion, and then I will ask you, do you have another alternative motion depending on this? But let's put this motion first. So we've got a mover and a seconder. We are talking about the motion in front of you. All in favour? Councillor Stallard, Councillor Boyd, Councillor O'Connor. Against? Councillor Giardina, Councillor Sewell, Councillor Cannon, Councillor O'Donnell, Councillor Billich, Councillor Cooper, Councillor Blair, Councillor Ritchie, Councillor Thomas. Now we've got one alternative motion. Councillor O'Connor, did you want to foreshadow another alternative motion, and do you have the wording for it?
Yes, please, and yes, I do. It is that the council requests the CEO bring a report to the December 2020 OCM that details the issues and major constraints that the city would need to have addressed in any subsequent proposal from a proponent for the zigzag railway. That wording is straight out of the officer's comment in the agenda.
Thank you very much. I'm now going to the alternative motion of Councillor Giardina, and can we listen to the amendment again from Councillor Sewell, and then I will ask Councillor Giardina if he accepts the amendment.
Point of order.
Yes.
Point of order. The motion does not even have a seconder. So
Okay.
for that amendment to be spoken to, you need a seconder straight away.
Thank you very much, Councillor Billich. Can I have a seconder for Councillor Giardina's motion?
With the amendment. If Councillor Giardina is willing to accept the amendment, I'll second it with
Can
that
I
amendment.
just ask advice? Can you second it with the amendment, or do I need a seconder? Can I just get a seconder before we hear the amendment, or do you want to second it as it is? Councillor Sewell, do you wish to second this motion as it is?
I will second the motion as it is in good faith.
Thank you very much. I'll go to the mover. Councillor Sewell, would you like to make an amendment to the motion?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to make an amendment to the motion. The amendment pertains specifically, including point 1 specifically as Councillor Giardina has outlined, point 2, the removal of point 2 and use that as part of the rationale, and point 2 be undertaken in light of the outcome from the current consultation we're in.
Councillor Giardina?
Yeah, look, Madam Chair, I'm happy to remove point 2 for the time being.
Thank you.
And we'll go with point 1 if that's going to make it easier. And I'll just use the balance as my rationale.
Thank you.
Okay.
I'll go to the mover.
Excuse me, Madam Chair. Could I ask that we've made an amendment to that wording of that alternative motion. It's different to the one I've got in front of me.
It's okay. We'll go to the mover.
Right. The alternative motion is 1, defer the undertaking of any investigations or actions regarding the zigzag railway restoration proposal until after the current community consultations completed and responded to Council. The rationale behind it, councillors, is, and you'll see it on the copy you have, the premature nature of this motion is concerning. We have, well, the previous motion. There's probably wording in here now that doesn't suit because Councillor O'Connor's lost that. Have asked the community for submissions that we are deciding before having the consultation completed. This, in my view, is not good governance and will likely lead to reputation damage, given so many stakeholders are unaware of this proposal. There are many stakeholders who will need to have a say, so I'm proposing, whilst we await the results from the recent community submissions, we'll refer this proposal to all other key stakeholders. And that's what I was trying to say there, councillors, is that we look at, well, I was hoping that we would go to the Tourism Advisory Committee, Arts Advisory Committee, because these Bush Advisory Committees, these all have members of our community on there, all of them, plus councillors. Darling Range Community Consultative Committee, Nature Reserve Preservation Group, members of Kalamunda, Forestfield, Hasluck, Swan, Department of Biodiversity, Conservation and Attractions, Department of Tourism, Department of Indigenous Affairs, that was mentioned this evening, who was going to drive these trains, Main Roads WA, Public Transport Authority, Department for Planning, Lands and Heritage, Department of Fire Emergency Services, Pickering Brook Heritage Society, Australian Model Railway Association Incorporated, Western Australian Light Railway Preservation Associated Incorporated, and the Western Australian Model Railway Club Incorporated. So basically what I'm trying to achieve here is that that the officers, by working in tandem with what we are doing currently, seeking the feedback from the consultation that we've had, we can work in tandem and go out at no cost, mind you. Councillor O'Connor mentioned that there was a cost associated to it. I'm saying at no cost. I made sure of that when this was put together. So there could be some staff time, but there's very little. And basically what I'm trying to do, ascertain, get as much information as we possibly can for this area, because if it goes away now, it could come back down the track to revisit us again, and we've still got no information. So I think it's important for us to work in tandem with these government departments at the moment, get the information that's going to come back from the consultation, and seek information from these other government bodies, which will at some point in time have to be involved. Now, I'm saying again, you know, I chair the Tourism Committee. I'd love for this to come at that committee for us to discuss it there. I think it needs to go there at some point in time if councillors wished for it to go there, and some of the others where they do contain different government departments and different bodies in there, and also members of our community. So, councillors, I think it's a good motion. This it gives our staff some direction. Let's see where it takes us, Madam Chair. I'm happy to listen to the councillors.
Thank you. I'll go to the seconder, Councillor Sewell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to reflect on what Councillor Giardina has said this evening, and I think it is good governance to allow a process that's already in play to complete, and we've sought that advice from the community in good faith, and I've reassured members of the public that there is not a predetermined outcome in relation to this consultation. And I think for our own integrity, it's vitally important that we see this process through. I've just actually reminded myself of the Zigzag Scenic Drive survey that was provided, and there is opportunity for people, if they so wish, to push the agenda for the reinvigoration of a railway line to be stated within that survey. So I'm comfortable that the scope of the survey actually addresses that. Yeah, I think it is good governance. I think it shows integrity that we are waiting to hear back from the community. Once we hear back from the community, we can then be directed by the community, which is the way it should be.
Thank you, Councillor Sewell. Is there a speaker against?
Question?
Would I be able to propose a minor amendment to this motion?
Yes, let's hear.
I'd like to remove the words railway restoration proposal and leave it as an investigations or actions for after the consultation is completed, so that we are open-minded to other investigations or actions after the consultation period, not just the railway restoration proposal.
I'll go back to the mover. Are you happy to remove railway restoration proposal?
I suppose, Madam Chair, it does make sense because the what's out there at the moment is comments
about the zigzag,
seeking comment about the zigzag. So it does make sense. This was predicated on the motion, the prior motion, so which has been lost. So I have no issue with that.
Councillor Sewell, do you have any objection to that?
No objection.
Okay. And that you have a question, Councillor Village?
Yes, I do. When Councillor Giardina read out point 1, there is one word that is different to what we have written in front of us and what is on the screen. He said the word was the community consultation is completed and responded to council. I want it clarified, please, that on the screen and here it is reported to council, and also to clarify that we are only the motion on the floor at this point in time is only point 1.
Councillor Giardina, are you happy to leave it reported?
Yeah, absolutely.
And
that's the intent.
The motion we are looking at is what is on your screen now, which is point 1. Do I have a person speaking against the motion? Councillor O'Connor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be brief because I'm only going to touch on new information. So we're getting close to, I think, where we're going to land. And this motion in front of us says that we defer undertaking any investigations or actions until after the current community consultation is completed and reported to council. My fallback position was that we take up the CEO's offer to bring a report back to the December OCM, and then we'll have everything in front of us. We don't have to wait till a report has come back and then it says defer undertaking any investigations. We don't have to wait for that report to come back and then consider undertaking more investigations. The CEO has offered to do some prelim work. I think, given that the first motion is lost, the best outcome would be to support the CEO's, take up the CEO's offer and reject this one, which says do nothing until a point in time, and support the one that says the CEO will work in the background and do some work and come back to the December OCM.
Councillor O'Connor, I believe your motion is completely different to this motion. This motion is about the survey that we have done. Your motion is a completely different one, and I was planning on having, there's no reason why we couldn't have both. We couldn't have, could I take some advice on that? Can we have the CEO bringing a report to the December meeting and defer?
Can I offer comment on that one?
Yes.
Couldn't it come under through your jurisdiction, for item 14, urgent business approved by the presiding member, which is a reflection of what we've been discussing tonight, so it's not outside the realm of what we've been doing.
Can I have some advice on whether we could have both motions or one? Is it one or the other?
There is nothing stopping you having both motions, but whether they'll work, complement each other is another issue. But there's nothing stopping you having two motions. They don't conflict in any particular manner.
Councillor O'Connor?
Question. Can the CEO advise when she expects the report from the consultation to come to Council?
We are aiming for December. We've had over nearly 1,400 submissions, so obviously there's a fair bit of work there. I'm just wondering if it is possible to combine some advice around the railway into that report. Could I have some advice from my director, who would be working on that part of it, followed by my manager, who will be working on the survey, to see if we could bring back a report in December that would address both matters, please?
Thank you. Through the chair. Okay. Obviously, the first thing would be in the council report for the zigzag community consultation is addressing the issues with that and producing a set of discussion items and the recommended outcomes. Then it is feasible and not too hard to then also in the detailed body of the report to include if a train was to be considered to use a zigzag scenic drive, what are the issues that could be faced for that as part of zigzag scenic drive. If, however, the consideration was to look at the issues for the concept of a train from the bottom right through to Pickering Brook as per the proposal purported by the proponents, I would recommend it's a separate report to stand alone so it can be read in that context.
Thank you. So, can I hear from the manager first, please?
No problem at all. And I just want to clarify, I believe we could be ready for a consultation report in December. Okay. From our point of view, we've had 1,373 survey responses along with 23 submissions. I will note that one of those questions, question number 13 in the hard copy survey, specifically references the future of the site. And one of the things that the technical officers will be working with our team to do is to actually make comment on each of the key themes that are identified via the submission. So many of you will be used to the fact that when we produce consultation reports, the officers and the planners are very well known for this, will actually then make comment against those submissions. Because of the very large volume of submissions, rather than making individual comment in all occasions, we're actually pulling out those key themes. So it's very likely to see technical comment around any of the key themes, including themes around what community would like to see for the future of the site.
Councillor Sue, you have a question?
It's actually a point of order. Now, when this went out and the consultation went out in relation to the zigzag scenic drive, which was signed off by council, at no point was there any intent or there was any incorporation of this specifically, and I'm very concerned that we're heading down the track of contaminating the data and the report.
I take your point, Councillor Sewell, so I'm going to make a decision here. We're going to look at these as two separate things. One is about the zigzag, just about the zigzag, and it's Councillor Giardina's motion that we don't really do anything till we get the results of the survey. And then after this motion is whatever happens to it, we can have another motion from Councillor O'Connor asking the CEO to bring back a report about the railway issues. So are councillors happy with that approach? Let's we've got a mover and a seconder. We've had our debate. Let's put this motion that's in front of you right now. All those in favour? Councillor Stallard, Councillor Giardina, Councillor Sewell, Councillor Cannon, Councillor O'Donnell, Councillor Billich, Councillor Cooper, Councillor Blair, Councillor Ritchie, Councillor Thomas. Against? Councillor Boyd, Councillor O'Connor. That motion is carried. Councillor O'Connor, would you like to make another motion about a report coming back about the railway from the CEO or not?
Yes, I will, with your
It's not an
indulgence.
alternative motion,
No,
it's a
it's a new
completely
one, and
different motion.
Thank you for allowing me to table it. The minute taker has it on the screen.
Thank you. Do you wish to make any more comments, or are you...
No, I think all arguments have been made, and I think...
Councillor Boyd, do you wish to add anything? Is there any debate? Councillor Ritchie?
I just have a question, I suppose, perhaps a point of clarification. I am concerned that it's simply being referred to as a zigzag railway, and that is a very vastly different proposition to something going to Pickering Brook. And I think if we're talking about this, we need to actually say it for what it is. A railway restoration, I know it used to be called the zigzag, but it's much bigger than that. And I just want a point of clarification. Are we only talking about a railway on the zigzag, which is what you're saying? Or are we talking about the whole proposal all the way through to Pickering Brook?
I'll go back to the mover. If you could make that clear, Councillor O'Connor.
Yeah, I understand the question. I think it's generally understood that the Zigzag Railway is connected to the Zigzag Railway Restoration Group, which and connected to their feasibility that they have published. So I would say it's widely understood that it encompasses from the bottom all the way out to Pickering Brook.
Okay, so we've got a mover and a seconder. A question,
Madam,
Councillor?
just a question to the CEO through you. What costings would be associated with this, doing this body of work? Will
Through
you
the
come,
chair,
will you come
offers
back?
the time, but maybe the director could elaborate on what time frames we would take to come up with these constraints.
Through the chair, I've been thinking about this quite significantly since the notice of motions have been discussed. I think it will be officer time, and I envisage that the relevant officers throughout the administration would be workshopping the issues that they could everyone's expertise is so broad and deep on various aspects. I'm sure we could prepare a fairly comprehensive set of issues through a half-day workshop, if that, and it's just officer time.
Thank you. Are there any other questions?
I'd like to make a minor word amendment
Councillor Blair?
and remove the word railway. I just think we're repeating exactly what we've just done, and we've taken the word railway out of the previous motion. I understand that. And we're just doing it again.
Councillor O'Connor, do you wish to comment on that?
I won't accept that.
Okay. Councillor Billich, you have a question?
Yes, my question is that I disagree that this motion should even have been allowed, because it's actually, from my point of view, in direct contradiction to the one we've just passed, because we just passed one where it said that we will defer any undertakings of any investigations or actions, and what we are doing here is we are asking for actions. Even though it's from staff, it's still an action. I think it is wrong.
I take your point, Councillor Billich. I'm still going to allow it because the first one is about the survey, about the zigzag, and this motion is about the railway. It's just asking for more information about the railway, so I'm going to allow it. So is there a speaker against the motion? If not, I'm going to put this motion. All those in favour? Councillor Stallard, Councillor Boyd, Councillor Cannon, Councillor O'Donnell, Councillor O'Connor and Councillor Thomas. How many is that, please? 6. I will use my... I can allow this motion, so the motion is carried. Thank you. Councillors, I think this is a good time to take...
Can you make sure, sorry, for the record, that you've indicated those who voted for and against?
Against?
Yes,
sorry, I will make this against.
Yes, sorry.
Councillor Giardina, Councillor Sewell, Councillor Billich, Councillor Cooper, Councillor Blair, Councillor Ritchie.
Just for the record, sorry.
Thank you. I think this is a good time to take a 5-minute break, councillors, and then we'll go to the reports. there's... Back to page 8, reports to council, 10.1.1. Are there any questions, councillors?
Yes, for this particular item? Yes.
Councillor Stella, do you have a question?
Thank you. I'd probably like to move it as well, but before that, I would dearly love to, after hearing Mr Cunningham speaking on this item, and Councillor Ritchie followed up with a few requests, and I think they've been acted on, and also I'd like to see if the director could give us an outline of some of the changes, what's happening in the new structure of this particular motion, so that the community can be aware of it as well.
Thank you, Councillor Stallard.
Through the Chair, thank you for your query, Councillor Stallard. The City has made some adjustments to the local planning policy since the public agenda briefing. They are outlined within the policy and stipulated in paragraph 27, but I'll briefly outline what those additions are. The additions are provisions that enable the City to impose conditions on holiday homes or Airbnbs that require approvals initially for a 12-month period. And over that 12-month period, that particular development or use can be observed and any issues monitored. And at the conclusion of that 12-month period, the applicant would reapply and an approval would be issued for a 5-year period. At the conclusion of the 5-year period, they'd have to reapply and we could observe and ensure that that operation is not having amenity impacts or any other impacts to the general locality. And it also keeps applicants and operators to account, because it's not given that that approval runs with the land. It will run for a period of time and then the owner will have to reapply, and it's in their interests. It's in their interest to operate a good Airbnb or a good unhosted holiday home because that will be taken into consideration on any applications that are reapplied for. Another stipulation in the policy is that an approval runs with the landowner and not the land. And they're the key elements that have been added to this local planning policy since the public agenda briefing in response to submissions, in response to deputations and in response to queries and questions from councillors. In addition, we've added a notation to the recommendation that includes foreshadowing that the City is currently in the process of preparing local planning scheme number 4, and that we are investigating provisions around unhosted holiday homes as part of that local planning scheme amendment.
Thank you. Are there any other questions?
Yes.
Councillor Giardina.
Why 5 years? Why not 3?
Director.
Through the Chair, 5 years was considered an appropriate time after a 12-month period in the initial instance. It could go to 3 years. I'm happy if councillors are comfortable to move 3 years. 3 years could be considered. On balance, we considered 5 years an appropriate time. The policy does have a number of regulatory provisions within there, hoops, so to speak, for applicants to jump through. Giving 5 years would give a bit of extra time for them to operate, but I'm happy to take some guidance if council are wanting to reduce that time frame to 3 years.
Councillor Ritchie, you have a question?
Yes, just thanks through the director. With the scheme amendment, I understood that we were thinking one of the possibilities was that it would give the power to the council, if someone was in breach of those conditions, to actually remove their approval. Can I just have a confirmation that's one of the things we are considering underneath for that scheme number 4?
Through the Chair, through the preparation of scheme number 4 in relation to holiday homes, we are considering a revocation provision, and that revocation provision allows the City to revoke an approval for an Airbnb or unhosted holiday home at any point in time as a result of complaints or any impacts to neighbouring residents and the like.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Councillor.
Thanks, Madam Chair. When are we going to be doing the town planning scheme, reviewing our town planning scheme?
Through the Chair, we're currently in the process of reviewing the planning scheme at the moment and preparing the new local planning strategy.
Great, thanks.
The officer recommendation, Councillor Cooper, sorry, I don't see you that well.
Not really a question, but I just wanted to thank
the director for all the work he's put into this, because a lot of us have had concerns and he's dealt with them between him and Andrew. I just wanted to say thank you very much.
And thank you for your comment, Councillor Cooper.
Appreciate that, Councillor Cooper. Thank you very much.
So we have no more questions. Can I have a Councillor Blair?
Yes, I'd like to follow up on Councillor Jardina's comment about changing from 5 years to 3 years.
Probably the best way to handle this is I'll put the officer recommendation, unless the General Counsel has another option. No? I'll put the officer recommendation, which is 5 years. If that isn't carried, we'll go to 3 years.
Sorry, he does have a comment now.
We could have a mover move it with an amendment, if you so desire.
Okay, do we have a mover?
Well, I'm happy to move it with the amendment to 3 years.
With an amendment to 3 years. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Blair?
Second.
Happy to second. So, councillors, we are talking about... We are talking about 3 years and we're just waiting to reword it with the amendment.
Subject to amending 5-year timeframe to 3 years.
So I'm going to put this motion, then if it's lost, then we'll go back to 5 years, but I'm sure it will be carried. Does everyone understand the motion? Got a mover and a seconder. Is there going to be any debate? I'll put the motion. All those in favour? That is carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. 10.1.2, Extractive Industries Local Law. Are there any questions? Is there a mover for the officer recommendation on page 17? Councillor Sewell, seconded by Councillor Stallard. Is there going to be any debate? I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Item 10.2.1, Kalamunda Town Centre. Are there any questions? Can I please...
I want to say is that I'm happy that we've come a fair way to resolving some of these issues with the staff and the Progress Club. So there's some that probably they're still not happy with, but in the main, I think we've come a fair way.
Thank you. The officer recommendation is on page 23. Do I have a mover? Councillor Blair, seconded by Councillor Jardina. Is there going to be any debate? I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. There are no corporate services reports, so we go on to 10.4.1, events. Are there any questions? Councillor Boyd.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I just have one question for the manager. Obviously, I just have a question in regards to should this motion be passed by council tonight. Obviously, there still is a budget, I'm assuming a budget motion hanging over these. But just wondering, in light of the current COVID restrictions that we are still under, I'm just wondering, is there going to be a trigger for the planned events that would result in them being postponed should there be a second wave of COVID? And if the answer to that is yes, would it be the same for all of the events or would it vary?
Manager, could you please respond to that question?
Through the chair, just on question 1, we've got that it's listed for consideration. So that's what we would normally say if we want to highlight something. We'll be coming through that budget review process. So this is not approving anything tonight in terms of funding. It still has to come through the budget process. And I'm sure the manager will take on board your second request around if we have phase 2, touch wood.
Thank you. Are there any other questions?
Did you
Can I... Can I have a mover for the officer recommendation on page? Oh, sorry, Manager, if you'd... Yes.
Thank you very much for the question, Councillor Boyd. So it is something that we're inaptly aware of, not just in relation to events, but actually in relation to all business at the City of Kalamunda. So currently we still have a recovery management team that is meeting. Should there be anything that looks to be a second wave, then that would actually enact the City reinstating its crisis management team in relation to this particular matter. Currently, we're following all of the guidance from the state government and we're carefully monitoring that. Just on Friday, there were announcements in relation to events where events of more than 500 people will now require what is called a COVID event plan, which will actually be signed off by the Public Health Department here at the local government, and for higher risk events, it will go through to the Department of Health. We've already had initial discussions that whilst those plans are not actually required unless there are more than 500 people, we are proposing to actually complete them for all events just as a matter of best practice. And should there be any changes due to a COVID situation, we would be looking to alert councillors of those changes as soon as possible.
Thank you. Councillor Sewell, you have a question?
Thank you. It's really a follow-up question in relation to that. So in terms of mitigation against the costs associated with that, what arrangements have been put in place if there is, heaven forbid, second wave, in terms of recuperating those costs or ensuring that in terms of paying contractors and that kind of thing, what has been put in place so that we don't lose a significant amount of funding if COVID-19, we do get a second phase?
Thank you. Manager, would you like to respond to that?
Thank you very much for the question, Councillor Sewell. One of the measures that we have put in place is that we are currently still not actually undertaking any formal bookings. So the reason that we've brought you a report forward only looking at October to December is because we are not locking in contractors, and obviously actually can't regardless due to the budget constraints. But even with budget allocated, we would not be locking in contractors until as close as possible to the events. It is a very difficult situation, particularly for those contractors. But the reality is that we need to actually look after the City of Kalamunda, and there is no other provision. When you come to looking at events, when you're looking at infrastructure costs and the like, once you have made payments and bookings, generally speaking, there's 50% cancellation fee. And so what we're actually doing is we're speaking to potential operators and partners that we work with and saying, these are some of the things that we're looking at, but we wouldn't be looking to make any bookings until absolutely required. And as I said, carefully monitoring the COVID situation and no pre-booking. So generally speaking, at this time of the year, we would have already booked in, for example, entertainment, staging, lighting and the like for things like the Carimbia Festival. At this point, there isn't even any planning for that particular event because we need to just keep continually monitoring both the COVID scenario and also the potential budget opportunities.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Is there a mover for the officer recommendation on page 32? Councillor Boyd, seconded by Councillor Cooper. Is there going to be any debate? I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. 10.4.2, funerals in public open spaces. Are there any questions? Is there a mover for the officer recommendation? Councillor Giardina, seconded by Councillor O'Donnell. Is there going to be any debate? I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Councillor Stallard, Councillor Giardina, Councillor Sewell, Councillor Cannon, Councillor O'Connor, Councillor O'Donnell, Councillor Billich, Councillor Cooper, Councillor Blair, Councillor Ritchie, Councillor Thomas, and against Councillor Boyd. Motion is carried. Are there any questions on 10.5.1, draft monthly financial statements? Is there a mover for the officer recommendation on page 46? Councillor Ritchie, seconded by Councillor Stallard. Is there going to be any debate? I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Debtors and creditors report. Are there any questions, councillors? Can I have a mover for the officer recommendation on page 52? Councillor O'Connor, seconded by Councillor Blair. Is there going to be any debate? I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Rates debtors report. Are there any questions? Can I have a mover? The officer recommendation on page 57, Councillor O'Donnell, seconded by Councillor Boyd. Is there going to be any debate? I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Councillor Giardina, are you in favour? Thank you. Carried unanimously.
I'm going to leave the room for 10:54.
Through the chair, before you do, Councillor Giardina, I had a couple of late declarations of interest on this item I'd like to read out now, please.
Yes, please.
Okay, so Councillor Cannon is declaring an interest on this item due to her husband being on the committee of the Forestville Football Club, which is one of the recipients of a grant, declaring an impartiality interest. Councillor Boyd is also declaring an impartiality interest as she is involved with the Forestville Football Club as a coach, and will also be declaring an impartiality. Thank you.
Councillor O'Donnell, you have a question?
Yeah, I actually have questions about the pink agenda, so I was going to suggest that they don't move and that we leave this till the end because we probably have to discuss other things in the pink agenda.
So you'd like to go behind closed doors?
Well, I'd rather leave it as part of all the other discussions if that would make it easier.
Can I
unless
ask, is
there's
there
no one
any
there.
people in the community left? Yes. Okay, so it's best to move it.
Okay. Can we ask Councillor Giardina to come back and we will take this to the end? Councillor Giardina, we're going to move this motion towards the end, so we're going to go on to 10.5.5, the proposed warehouse in Wattle Grove. Are there any questions? Is there a mover for the officer recommendation on page 84? On page, 80, page 80. Councillor Boyd, you have a question? Happy to move it. It's on page 80. I just found it. Is there a seconder? Councillor O'Connor. Is there going to be any debate? I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. 10.5.6, development contribution. Are there any questions, councillors? Do I have a mover for the officer recommendation on page 90? Councillor Sewell. And a seconder? Councillor O'Connor. Is there going to be any debate, councillors? I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. 10.5.7, the draft Metro Net East redevelopment scheme. Are there any questions, councillors? The officer recommendation is on page 106. Do I have a mover? Councillor Sewell, seconded by Councillor O'Connor. Is there going to be any debate? I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. City of Kalamunda submission. Operations Centre, Kelvin Road. Are there any questions? Can I have a mover? Councillor Sewell. The officer recommendation is on page 118. We've got a mover. Can I have a seconder? Councillor Billich. Is there going to be any debate? I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. 10.5.9. Are there any questions? The officer recommendation is on page 128. Do I have a mover? Councillor Boyd, seconded by Councillor Ritchie. Is there going to be any debate? Put the motion. All those in favour? That's carried. Councillors, item 10.5.10, in the pink pages, there is an error, So the CEO has conflict of interest, financial interest, and is leaving the room. I just wanted to advise you that on page 81 of the pink pages, there's an error. In point 2 it says support. That's an error. This is the same as what we discussed at the last meeting, and it should be note, not support. You've all received an email with that, but you may not have seen it. So does everyone understand that?